starts up the chat. If you would click on that, you'll be able to see on the right where you can chat to individuals privately or to the entire group. Again, my name is Scott Apnell. If you have any questions, please shoot me a chat. If it's something really time sensitive, we may interject with the speakers, but in general, we're going to keep the Q&A to the end. We are going to leave ample time for that. I am going to give it just another minute here to get started at 9:02 for people who may have hit traffic on the way to their living room, and we'll talk to you in a couple minutes. Okay, good morning, everyone. We are going to get started. Again, this is Scott Apnell. Today's session is helping your team move forward post-COVID-19. We're happy to have two speakers for us today. I am going to, just as housekeeping, again, we're going to be doing the Q&A afterwards. If you have any questions, please send me a note on the chat, and we'll make sure we get to all of them as quickly as possible. Our first speaker today is Carolyn Lamparella. If you've attended safety peer groups in the past, you've probably heard her speak at least once. She's our expert in all things mental, behavioral health, and wellness. Carolyn is a licensed professional counselor. She's, in addition to being a very accomplished long-term counselor, she is also the director of Preferred EAP. And if you don't know what Preferred EAP is, that is the employee assistance program utilized by Lehigh Valley Health Network, and it is also available to companies outside of LVHN, of which there's several dozen that we provide the employee assistance for, Carolyn and her team. So since the COVID pandemic started, Carolyn has been very active, her and her team, not only counseling individuals as they're coping to all these changes and stressors, but she's also narrowed in on some groups that have had a really hard time or a lot harder time in the current environment. Obviously, healthcare being a major one, but she's also been putting on free webinars for teachers and education, as well as first responders. So she has a wealth of knowledge from her experience, but as well as what she's hearing from individuals during the pandemic, and has some really good advice. So we'll start with Carolyn, and then we'll introduce our second speaker, Tiffany, when Carolyn's done. Over to you, Carolyn.
Okay. Thanks so much, Scott. Just quickly, I just want to make sure I understand how much time I have so I don't go over. Scott, can you remind me?
We are, we're going to do 15, 20 minutes each on actual presentation, and then Q&A will be as long as you can take questions. Last week's session, we had about an hour and a half of Q&A. So,
okay,
yes,
great.
So,
okay.
take what time you need, and if you can hang out a little longer than the hour, that would be great too.
Okay, great. So Tyler, can you move to my first slide? There we go. So my hope in 15 minutes is to give you kind of an overview of what I think your employees are likely experiencing as they return to work. And I wanted to start with, some of you have been on some of my webinars before, so you've seen this model. I really like this model as a way of identifying how people are coping with change. And just to kind of quickly go through it, we all were operating, when we first heard about COVID-19, it impacted us, but it didn't impact us too dramatically. We were all still operating at our status quo. Things weren't too disruptive. But then over time, this introduction of this foreign element, this COVID-19, it grew and grew to the point where it really disrupted our status quo. And, we can all remember what happened at that time. The initial reaction for all of us is resistance. And that is a very natural reaction. And, we saw lots of video footage of, kids on the beach, for spring break, just sort of resisting this movement away from the old status quo. And then after we work through this resistance, we're in this period of chaos where we're sort of recalibrating everything. Our whole lives have been disrupted, and we're in this chaos, and our normal routines are disrupted. Everything that we have done sort of habitually, that is sort of in background noise, is now in the forefront, and we're having to rethink everything. And if this is a time period when I'm sure all of you that are on this call, have spent a lot of time and energy supporting your folks during this time period, because, through this chaos as leaders, this is when we really needed to be present and supportive and nurturing, to help our folks move through this chaotic period. And, that involved a lot of transforming ideas. Here we are on this WebEx, one of those transforming ideas, where we had to rethink how are we going to do business the way we have in the past, with new tools, new ideas. And we had to really be creative. And those are all those transforming ideas that help us move through that chaos. And once we're able to move through, then we go through a period of integration where we really have to practice all of these new behaviors, these new routines, because they're not automatic. This is something that requires a lot of time, energy, thought, and it can be really exhausting, But over time, the hope is through this integration, through this practice, we reach a new status quo. And the one thing I want to emphasize about this change model is it's not a linear process. We can go in and out of these stages depending on what's going on. As folks return to work, they may have reached a point where they're in this new status quo at home, but now they're coming to work and it's going to be different. And it's going to require thought and energy and focus, and it's going to be challenging for folks. And so I just wanted to give you this framework so that you have some idea of where your people might be in the process of returning to work. We can move to the next slide, Tyler. And so another way to look at this is, as we move from the old status quo to the new status quo, there's lots of wonderful gains. Anytime we experience a change or a loss, we have gains that come along with it. So, we have been so creative and found new ways to connect with one another. It's so wonderful to hear about everyone getting on these Zoom calls with one another to try to stay connected and continue to feel close to their loved ones. But there's also loss, and with loss comes fairly strong emotions, and the stages that I'm presenting here on this slide are the well-known stages of coping with loss. Denial, we can, going back to the beginning, we can think about all that video footage that we saw of people sort of denying this reality. And you can still see that today when you go to the grocery store, people who just refuse to wear masks or just don't want to accept that this change is happening. We have people who are stuck in anger. You saw these protesters who were so angry about the disruption to their employment. We bargain, we're trying to figure out, okay, well, if I just do this, that will keep me safe. sadness comes next, where we just are really grieving this change, this loss, and it's really challenging. And this is a time when depression is really a concern, because this is when the reality is really setting in. And then hopefully we get to a point of acceptance. And in this acceptance phase, that's when we start to really integrate that new status quo and make it part of our new routines, new way of operating. But again, this is not a linear process, and people are going to go in and out of these stages as we continue to grapple with COVID-19 and the impact it's having on us. You can move to the next slide, Tyler. So this also is a sort of a representation of stress, because obviously there's tremendous stress through change, through coping with this process. And for many, even whether people have been continuing to work, whether you're on the front lines, whether you've been at home, we've all been engaged in hypervigilance. So no matter what concrete stress is right in front of us, we have all had to rethink everything. And so the end result of that chronic stress is exhaustion. And that is across the board. We are all feeling a collective exhaustion. And again, this is the time when we are really concerned about depression settling in, because that is the end result of chronic stress, is, we start to see more mental health concerns arising. So it's something for us to really pay attention to. And, some people might be surprised at how exhausted they are. They might feel like, well, I'm not on the front lines. I'm not dealing with this directly. Why do I feel so exhausted? Well, that is the end result of this hypervigilance that we've all been engaged in for the last 2 months. You can move on to the next slide. So I want, your jobs as safety directors, as HR directors, whatever your role is, one of the things I know that you focus on is, what are the vulnerable parts of your system where injury is likely to occur? And I wanted to emphasize, that not only are we looking at physical danger, we have to start looking at emotional vulnerability. And I love this definition, because I'm sure everybody on this call can relate to this. This is the emotion we experience during times of uncertainty. I've never in my lifetime experienced this level of uncertainty. We've compared this experience to 9/11, but the difference is, with 9/11, it was a concrete event. We coped with it and we moved on. This is uncertain. This is uncharted territory. And so there's this constant uncertainty that we are dealing with in this anticipatory anxiety. And so that makes us much more vulnerable than we ever have been. And so it's important to recognize that as your employees are coming back, their emotions are going to be really strong, because they are feeling more vulnerable than they have in the past. You can move on to the next slide. So the goal here is to restore balance and develop a new status quo. And with that, how do we do that? We have to raise everything to a conscious level. You can move on to the next slide. And the first step is to ask your employees, talk to them. What do you need from me to feel safe? You have to engage them. You cannot assume, because as I reviewed those stages, it's really important for you to connect with where your folks are in this process and to be non-judgmental. We have to recognize that everybody is going to be feeling a different level of vulnerability. They're going to be going through these stages at different rates. And so the only option you have is to ask them. You really need to understand what is it that they need in order to feel safe when they return to work. You can move on to the next slide. I'm really aware of my time. I hope I'm not going too fast, but so, your job is to listen, empathize. You are not responsible for fixing their emotions. Your job is to empathize with them and to recognize that they are feeling strong emotions. Listen, but but resist the temptation to feel as though it's your job to fix their emotional experience. You can move on to the next slide. The best way for you to help alleviate their anxiety is to communicate frequently. So once you understand what it is that your employees need, you have to be so intentional about your communication. Whatever you used to do, you have to multiply that by 10, and you have to be as clear as possible. This is no time for ambiguity because we are all already feeling so much uncertainty and anxiety. This is the time when you have to be very clear, very specific, and very direct. You can move on to the next slide. So many of you are probably familiar with this, the Japanese railway system, the pointing and calling system. It's really so fascinating to watch. The whole purpose of this pointing and calling system is to raise conscious awareness of the actions every day. And I'm sure that you as safety directors already have many systems like this in place. You know, if you go back to Atul Gawande, who developed the checklist system for surgery, you know, where they have to go through this process of calling off one item after another. The purpose of this is to raise actions to a conscious awareness. And this is going to be so important because you have to remember we're all operating from a new status quo. So things that were automatic are no longer automatic. And we have to be thinking in terms of external structures that we can put in place that support what you are trying to accomplish with your folks at work. And that includes physical safety, as Tiffany will speak to, but also emotional and mental health. You know, you've got to find ways to insert those pauses where folks are able to take a break and just regroup and rethink, you know, what they're doing. And that requires maybe signage that you post around just helping people be aware. Things that you can play over the intercom. I know we've talked about this in the hospital, to try to play songs, music, things that will get our folks to pause and reflect on how they're doing, take some deep breaths, regroup, and then move forward. You can move on to the next slide. So again, these are the things that you're negotiating: routines, rituals, boundaries, and connections. I want to say two things from this slide is, number one, boundaries. You know, your folks are going to be so emotional at times that it's tempting to maybe loosen your boundaries and allow more of that emotion to be present. But I want to be clear that it's you as the leader have to establish what's okay and what's not okay. And again, this is the time for clarity. It is okay to be angry. It's not okay for you to lose your cool at work. It is not okay for you to go off on people. You have to establish those boundaries. You can be angry, but this is how you're allowed to be angry. And again, clarity is so important. You do not want to be ambiguous, and it is not your responsible to fix their emotions. It is your responsibility to be empathic and to set those boundaries. I also want to talk about connections. This is a time to really be clear about the connections that your people have. You know, because one of the things we're really concerned about is isolation. Through this, you know, social distancing, for many people that has resulted in social isolation. And isolation, we know, exacerbates any mental health struggles that people have, any emotions. You know, that isolation is going to intensify that experience. So this is the time to really understand, you know, what connections do your people have? Do they have people at home? Do they have a support system? This is the time to connect them to EAP resources. You know, make sure that they are in some way, shape, or form connected. We can move on to the next slide. So, you know, as we are establishing these new habits, new routines, just keep these 4 criteria for developing a new habit in mind. We want to make things easy. If it's too difficult, then it's going to be too hard for people to do. Try to come up with systems, with routines, with rituals that are easy. Make it easy for people to pause and reflect, to take a break. Make it obvious. Have triggers available, that trigger this new behavior. Make it attractive. You want to reinforce when people are performing these new behaviors or are taking breaks, make it attractive, reward them for that, and make it satisfying. These behaviors should make it easier for them to do their job. It should make it easier for them to balance the stress. You can move on to the next slide. So I have some resources attached. If you have any questions, if there's anything I can help you with, I really want you to reach out to me directly, whether we are your EAP or not. We are here as a resource for you and want to support you as you're bringing your folks back to work. Thanks so much, and I will turn it over to Tiffany.
I'm actually going to jump in here a quick second before Tiffany starts. I just want to thank you, Carolyn, and for everybody else, I should let you know, I think you did a great job being very conscious to the time, Carolyn, but I've seen Carolyn do the hour-long version of this presentation, and there's a lot to say, so I know it was very difficult to get that to 20 minutes, so thank you for that. But if you would, I just reemphasize using the chat. The icons are at the bottom, the little cartoon bubble. If you have anything you maybe would like her to elaborate on or get into more detail, please throw it in the chat, and we'll keep going from there. And we'll do our best to get back to it. With that, on to Tiffany. Tiffany is part of Benefit Corporate Wellness. She has a master's in public health. She's a certified health education specialist. And prior to working for Benefit Corporate Wellness, she was in the insurance industry for 5 years. Throughout the COVID pandemic, what we've been seeing out of the benefit business is that one of the services we provide is health coaching, and a lot of people have been turning to their health coaches to talk their way through a lot of things. When I get feedback, overwhelmingly, that is what the health coaches are talking about. So we asked Tiffany to speak today, and I'm going to turn it over to her, and she's going to give us some information on things they're learning that can be very helpful to your employees. Over to you, Tiffany.
Thanks so much, Scott. So today I just want to talk a little bit about what's going to happen when you reopen your businesses and you start to bring your employees back to work. So what you can do to have a positive impact in their health. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Tyler. So one of the main things this pandemic has taught us is that public health plays such an important part in our society. But for the longest time, it hasn't been given the recognition it deserves. It has been basically put on the back burner. This pandemic has shown that in order to keep our society running smoothly, it requires healthy individuals, but it also requires the capacity to care for the sick. Our hope is that we look to public health as an essential component of society moving forward and incorporate it into our business practices, our social practices, and also our personal practices. Healthy living is no longer a luxury, it's now essential. As this quote says, it has taken a pandemic to expose serious gaps in our public health system and for Americans to recognize the essential role public health plays in keeping both people and the economy healthy. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So, excuse me, as an employer, when it comes to bringing employees back to work, the CDC has issued 3 main guidelines. The first is to reduce the transmission among employees. The second is to maintain healthy business operations. And the third is to maintain a healthy work environment. These 3 guidelines have a lot of overlap between the 3, so I'll go into them a little bit more detail. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So most importantly to reducing transmission is that employers must first and foremost encourage employees who are sick to remain at home. Whether you have a sick leave policy in place or if you're looking to implement them, make sure that employees know it's okay that they can stay home if they are sick. If an employee has tested positive for COVID-19 and has worked in the previous days, you are entitled to inform the affected employees of their possible exposure, but you need to maintain confidentiality Last week's presentation went into more detail about this and the legalities of what employers will face with this. So I believe we'll be able to get those slides if you want to know more about that. Also, to help reduce transmission, I'm sure many of you have heard time and time again to wash your hands with soap and water for 20 seconds. It's about the amount of time to saying happy birthday to yourself twice. So make sure that there's adequate soap and water for your employees to use. And then if that's not accessible, sanitizers with at least 60% alcohol should be provided to your employees. Another component that is useful in reducing transmission is allowing fresh air to circulate in the office. Obviously, if your job requires you to work outside, like construction, you'll be getting a lot of fresh air, but in an office setting, a lot of times there'll be stagnant air, excuse me, and that can trap droplets in the air for multiple hours. So if you work in an office that allows your windows to open, I would encourage you to do that. You can go to the next slide. So maintaining healthy business operations is essential for not only the health of your employees, but for the future of your businesses as well. Many people are working remotely currently, but many businesses did not have this capability before the pandemic, and so they've had to adapt very quickly. Consider offering this remote work for the near future, or incorporate parts of the remote work into your business by virtual meetings or even taking meetings outdoors. We're in a season where the weather is getting warmer, so it's the perfect opportunity to take meetings outside, get a little fresh air, get some physical activity in your day as opposed to just sitting behind a computer screen all day. Some companies may find it beneficial to offer flexible work hours or alternating days of individuals working in the office versus working from home. One of the things I think we will see when businesses are opening up is that it's not going to be an all or nothing approach. We'll not go from being completely shut down to everything reopened again and all the employees back in the office. So allowing employees to alternate between coming in the office and working from home on alternating days will help to maintain those social distancing guidelines even when the restrictions are lifted. And you might consider doing this for the next couple months as just to help keep those social distancing. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So maintaining a healthy work environment. It's important to keep surfaces clean. We have compiled this list of common surfaces that get overlooked a lot of times when doing your routine cleaning. There are EPA-approved cleaning supplies that can effectively disinfect a surface. And the link to these will be provided at the end of this presentation, and you'll have access to these slides in the next day or so. So it is important to note, though, that the CDC at this point has not documented any cases where a person has been infected from touching a surface that another person who has tested positive for COVID-19 has touched. The only documented transmissions have been through direct contact of respiratory droplets from an infected person, such as when they cough or sneeze. So cleaning these surfaces will just help to ensure that if someone did cough or sneeze on these surfaces, that they would be disinfected properly. You can go ahead to the next slide. So from different surfaces, for this quote, from the perspectives of science and national security, the correct strategy is clear. All Americans need to eat healthier food, lose weight, and get into good physical shape. All of this supports immunity. We have seen that, kind of going back to my previous comment about how the public health system has kind of been not focused on lately, it's so important now to focus on the health of your employees. You can go ahead to the next slide. So promoting health behaviors in the workplace. There are a number of things that you as employers can do to have a positive impact in the health of your employees. The first is offering a tobacco cessation program. Most people understand that smoking is harmful and causes cancer, and even vaping has become more popular in the previous years, but that can be just as harmful as smoking. Especially during a time like this when people are more stressed than usual with the uncertainty of the economy and their jobs, Many people who have previously quit smoking are now returning to work as smoking as a coping mechanism, but then they are more susceptible to complications from COVID-19. There are many types of tobacco cessation programs that can assist. We have a tobacco cessation program called Benequit, which is an individualized program that works with a participant through health coaching, like what Scott mentioned previously, and it uses the nicotine replacement therapy. So a health coach will work with a participant over a course of weeks in order to help them cope with stress and keep with the tobacco cessation program. Weight management is another thing that might be very beneficial. There's a joke with this quarantine that people will be gaining the quarantine 19 for the 19 pounds people will gain from being home every day, all day. But even apart from that, obesity is a major problem in our society, and many people are going to try and lose weight, but might not be successful on their own. So having a support system through an actual program could mean the difference of losing weight and keeping the weight off. There are free online classes that are available to team members, and you can join together over Zoom meetings or even WebEx like this. Videos can be found on YouTube, and our own LVHN Fitness Center is posting free workout videos on their Facebook page. I'll have a link to that as well in this presentation. Health coaching is another important aspect that has been extremely beneficial during the pandemic. The Lehigh Valley Health Network and also some of our corporate clients have relied heavily on health coaching services in order to connect with employees while they are working remotely. Many people are isolated away from family and friends during this quarantine, but with health coaching, they are connected directly with a health coach who will work with them to address health goals, and that can include managing stress or even something as simple as finding a healthy meal to cook for their family. A health coach will even refer individuals to EAP services, like with Carolyn's team, or to an employee's primary care physician. It's important right now to not sacrifice going to a primary care physician when you are sick. I know a lot of people are scared to go to a doctor's office for fear of getting COVID-19, but there are video visits that can happen, and also in the doctor's offices, there are precautions that are being taken so that it'll reduce your risk greatly for contracting COVID-19. If you have group insurance, you may want to check with your insurance provider to see if they offer any of these services. They might offer them for free or with a cost, but they may offer wellness credits with your insurance, so you would be able to use a vendor for these services like us. So check with your health plan to see if you can incorporate any of these services that if you do not currently have them. And all of these services can be done remotely, so there's no fear for gathering a bunch of people together for a weight management program. You can go to the next slide. So you can go ahead and put all of them on the slide at once. So another aspect of fighting COVID-19 is having a healthy immunity. A healthy immunity comes from regular physical activity, adequate sleep, and most importantly, the proper nutrition. As an employer, you might be thinking that you don't have much control over what your employees are eating, but in reality, you have a lot of influence. So do you occasionally bring catered meals into the office, have a snack stand, vending machine somewhere in the office that are filled with chips and candy? Do you bring in sweet treats for birthdays or work anniversaries or retirement parties? I'm not saying that any of these things are bad, but you're definitely allowed to bring cake in to celebrate a birthday. But are you promoting a healthy diet on most days? So I've compiled some of the practical recommendations for building a healthy immunity from nutritious foods that you can utilize for personal use, as well as incorporating them into your snack days at the office. So you want to consume about 4 to 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day. So for reference, the palm of your hand will act as a good reference of a serving size. It's not going to be the same for every fruit and vegetable, but that's just something that you can easily use to measure a serving size. If you're having trouble finding fruits and vegetables in grocery stores right now, try looking for local farmers markets that will be selling fresh produce, especially with the warmer weather. There's going to be a lot more fruits and vegetables in season, so hopefully access to those will be greater. Try and get adequate fiber every day. This is one of the most common nutrients that is lacking in American diets today. Fiber is found in a number of foods such as whole wheat bread, beans, seeds, nuts, and also fruits and vegetables are a very good source of fiber. When shopping for whole wheat bread, there's a difference between wheat bread and whole wheat bread. Always look at the ingredient list on the back, which will show that wheat bread is made with whole wheat flour. There's a difference between the whole wheat flour and wheat flour. When something is made with whole wheat, it contains the whole grain, which houses the nutrients. Refined grains, like what's found in the white bread, is going to process the grain so much that it's basically removing the fiber from the grain. So always look for whole grains. Fatty fish, such as salmon, is also a healthy option for building your immunity. Fish have omega-3 fatty acids, which is a form of healthy fat, so that can help prevent heart disease. And we've seen that heart disease is another risk factor for getting complications with COVID-19. Fermented foods such as sauerkraut, kefir, kombucha, and yogurt are all healthy options to incorporate fermented foods into your diet. And they provide probiotics into the diet, which will boost your immunity and clear out your system of toxins in the body. You also want to try and cut down on sugary drinks. Water is going to be the most beneficial drink for you to boost immunity. It basically cleanses out your system, helps your organs work properly. So drinking water is one of the key prevention methods. Try and remove artificial sweeteners from your diet, such as those found in diet sodas. Those can actually weaken your immunity, so just stick with water if you can. Next slide, please. So these are the resources that I mentioned earlier about the EAP-approved cleaning products, LVHN fitness videos, and the CDC guidelines that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. So thank you so much for having me, and I'll give it back to Scott, and then we can open it up for questions.
Thank you. While you were talking, Tiffany, Carolyn sent me a note on it kind of cued her of a resource she wanted to share. Carolyn, do you want to hop on?
Sure. So I just recently came across, talking about creating an external structure. I know the last time I did this workshop, a question came in about, are there any type of apps that can help remind us to pause and reflect? And if anybody has downloaded a meditation app, one of the features of most apps is to have those reminders where the phone automatically cues you to take a breath, or Headspace does this. But I recently came across another app that was developed by the National Center for PTSD called COVID Coach, and you can download that on your iPhone, or I think it's also available for Android. And it's just a great resource. You can encourage your employees to download it, just to give them some tips on how to take care of themselves. There's some meditation to it. There's just a tremendous amount of resources, and things like that are so beneficial. We need to use our technology to really help us, develop these new behaviors to help us work through, because we cannot rely just on our memory right now, because it's, I keep hearing that from more and more people that, my memory isn't what it used to be. And that's because we are all having to exert so much mental effort right now, more so than we ever have, to establish these new routines. One of the things, again, talking about external structure, I was, if any of you go to Costco, one of the things that I was so surprised to see at Costco is they have employees walking around with signs that say, don't forget to social distance. And again, it's a great example of, external structure, things that they're putting in place that help us remember so that we're not just relying on our own mental effort. Scott, I see you have some questions coming in, so.
Yeah, and I certainly didn't want to.
No, that's fine.
That's okay.
About that.
Yeah, well, and this one actually, I think, it can go to both of you, but while you have the mic, Carolyn, what you can start. The question was, how can we manage remote employees, meaning not in the office or workplace, who display emotional challenges?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, again, we have to be a little bit more creative. The most important thing is to establish some type of structured connection with our remote employees. We want to make sure to understand what are their resources at home, who do they rely on, who do they have in their world that they can talk to. And sometimes it requires us to engage those folks to support that employee. Often, you might need to interact with the spouse, and of course, we always are concerned about confidentiality. So we're trying to obtain permission. But, those are the times also to think about your EAP program, making a warm transfer. And by that, I mean, contacting the employee, saying, I'm concerned about you. I want to get you on the phone with our EAP program. Can I help you do that? We just want to be, again, so much more intentional, so much more direct and very clear. If we are concerned about someone, we don't want to be vague. We want to be very direct, ask direct questions so that we have a good understanding of what they are struggling with. I'll turn it over to Tiffany then.
Yeah, honestly, I think you kind of covered it all.
Okay. So the next question's a little, I think, more geared towards you, Tiffany. When we talked, or you talked, I should say, about the building immunity and the health effects with. I'm sorry, easy for me to say, with being prepared or having yourself in the best condition to against COVID. We said, or you said, that there's smoking is obviously one of those. It's a respiratory disease, and if you're already compromised from smoking, you're higher risk. But what are some of the other physical conditions or lack of physical condition that we should be looking out for to help boost that immunity?
Yeah, so a lot of the conditions that we're seeing with the complications from COVID are people with heart disease, obesity, high blood pressure. Any of those, we're seeing complications with COVID-19. So addressing those addressing those problems will help with your immunity. But even if you do have those conditions, just manage them properly, try and get as much physical activity as possible, and even doing just some little physical activity and eating better will actually help your immunity, even in the short term.
Thank you, Carolyn. Do you have anything you wanted to add to that one?
No, I think that, again, we're thinking about the physical well-being, but certainly emotional stress complicates all of those physical conditions and exacerbates the symptoms. So that's why, making sure that we're balancing out our stress. We're not going to be able to remove that stress, but we want to try to insert more recovery strategies than we ever have before. And what I always try to, emphasize is let's, be clear about what our reality is. We may not be able to dedicate an hour to physical exercise or an hour to meditation, but can we find ways to weave that in throughout the day, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, so that we are increasing those recovery strategies. That's going to be so important because we want to get that stress level lower so that it's not exacerbating those physical conditions and compromising our immunity.
Okay, this next question, let me read the question first. It says, our company has a temp login temperature login when you enter the building, and you take your own temperature and answer yes or no if you have symptoms, and the temperature being recorded so others can see, other employees. Can you give your suggestion on what we should be doing? I feel that asking yes or no to symptoms is fine, but the temperature should not be on the log. I'd actually like to take this one for a change, if you don't mind. From the occupational health side, this has been a lot of conversation on this topic. Our advice would be, is someone's temperature PHI? Probably not, but you are opening yourself up to a gray area for sure. And you also, in the case of somebody who does have a high temperature, you are putting information out there which can fuel the rumor mill, and that's not an environment you really want to get into. If it's, I'm 98.6, Joe's 98.2, Sheila's 98, who cares? But if Evie puts down she's 101, now they're like, oh, Evie might have COVID, and it goes around. So I would, it's not me to say wrong, but I would recommend, if there's a way to hide the temperatures, that's what we would definitely advise.
Scott, one of the things that you're alluding to is something that we at EAP have been dealing with, folks who feel like they're being discriminated against in some way or targeted because of potential symptoms, because of their racial background, because of, we all are so emotionally reactive right now and fearful that I agree with you that we have to be really cautious about the information we put out there, because we're not sure how people are interpreting it, and we certainly don't want to set people up to be targets. So I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. This one question came in, which I love that somebody asked this, because I have a friend in Georgia who is dealing with this right now for one of his employees as a legitimate problem that's been a big HR issue for him. So the question is, how do we address high-level fear in the workplace? And they elaborate that the employee does not want to rotate into the office. They're not a high-risk category employee. What's the guide for mental health care?
I certainly, that is something we are going to be facing more and more. And even folks who come back to work, they may be surprised at how fearful they are feeling. It really begins with making a connection with that employee and understanding, tell me what your fears are. Let's talk through them. Let's try to ground that fear in our current reality and talk about the things that we're doing to safeguard you when you are at work, and begin with that and really understand, what is the employee looking for? And if that is not sufficient, then it is, I think, essential to connect them with a mental health counselor, because perhaps they have an underlying condition, mental health condition like anxiety, generalized anxiety that they're struggling with. And obviously this is going to exacerbate that. So we want to make sure that they are connected with a mental health professional. In our situation, we have, through our EAP, we have a mandatory referral that employers are able to tap into. And in those situations, if it's a performance concern, if this employee is required to go back to work and they are refusing, that could be a mandatory situation where they are, as a condition of their employment, they're sent to EAP to help them work through that fear. And then the counselor, is in the position, rather than the HR person, the counselor is in the position of doing an assessment and really understanding what this employee needs and establishing a plan for them. And in some situations, there might be a need for more intensive treatment. In other situations, and we've encountered this certainly at EAP, where we have been able to help an employee work through their fear just by providing them with the proper information, making sure that they are well educated. We have to remember that people are being inundated with information, and some of it is good and some of it is not good. And so there's a lot of fear that comes from that misinformation. So, that's, how we approach it at EAP. In some situations, there might be folks who just cannot return. And I think as an employer, you have to, be clear about what that means for that employee. Again, clarity, clarity, clarity. We want to be direct and clear with our communication and also clear with our boundaries. So if the employee is required to come back, you've taken all these appropriate steps and they're not able to return, then you have to look at what other alternatives you have. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Carolyn. And just one point of clarification or taking a step further, and I just want to make sure I'm saying this right. When you talk about mandatory EAP, I've been asked in multiple different sessions over time, is mandatory EAP legal? And we have talked to our attorney speakers and like, can you force someone into counseling? And the answer interpreted into layman's speak is that it is legal as long as it is involved with a disciplinary type action. So I can't say, hey, Carolyn, you seem bummed out, you must go to EAP. But in my friend's situation, someone low risk, late 20s male had a complete breakdown when a customer walked in without a mask. Now it's in Georgia. I don't think they had the rules we do, but they came in without a mask and they said, go wait on the customer, and he just lost it in fear because this person didn't have a mask. That became a disciplinary problem and would be a cause for mandatory EAP. Is that correct?
And discipline might not be in that situation may not be necessarily the most accurate way to describe it. It's certainly an indication of a performance issue, that he's not able to perform his job. And so, referring to EAP is providing them with an option. If perhaps performance-based concerns is a better way to talk about this process, because when someone is just not able to do their job, we don't always know why. We don't always know what the underlying conditions are. And so sending them to EAP is giving them an option. It's creating a way for them to talk to somebody to uncover those concerns, those fears, those whatever it is that they're struggling with, and come up with a plan. Now, in terms of like the legal piece, we always tell people you're not going to ever terminate employment because someone refuses to go to EAP. When employment is terminated, it's because of their performance on the job. If they're not able to perform their job and you've provided adequate opportunities for them to contend with whether it's a physical condition or a mental health condition, and they've chosen not to take that option, you might make a decision about employment strictly based on their performance if they're not able to perform their job. Sending them to EAP is just one way to help them overcome that performance issue.
Okay, thank you. I do want to elaborate on one question. I spoke about the temperatures, and one of our HR professionals made a comment here. So, Scott Shamandel, you're still on, correct?
Yep, I just had to take myself off of mute.
Good morning. That's what everyone. I figured. So the comment that was made here, I want to read it, and then I'd like you to chime in on it. And for those of you who don't know, Scott Shamandel is with OSHA. This whole safety peer group is an OSHA Alliance program that we manage, and Scott is a compliance assistance specialist for OSHA. I always say he's the white hat of OSHA. He's out there to educate you, to keep you out of trouble. And to advise you. So, Scott, the comment that was made here is temperatures may be seen by OSHA as a medical record, and if documented, should be confidential. I know we talked about this a little bit last week, but in this context, could you clarify that one or elaborate on that a little bit?
So, in part, my understanding is, and let me just point out that there are a couple of issues here with COVID-19 and record keeping and reporting of these conditions and cases that we are still waiting for some FAQs, frequently asked questions, to be published. And we were told just last week that we will be seeing something in the very near future posted on our website dedicated to COVID-19 related issues. So that being said, my disclaimer is what I'm sharing now is what I know now, and certainly may change once the final comes out, hopefully this week, if not early next week. But anyway, with the temperature readings and going back even to the original question, I concur with your original premise there, Scott and Carolyn, that, again, we don't really need to record the actual temperature. I think a yes, no is fine. The element that we've been told and are looking at is that it may certainly become a medical record when a medical practitioner, licensed healthcare professional, is recording that entry on some type of document. Then it starts to follow the progression where it may become a medical record for that individual. And the recommendation has been then that you keep a separate record for each individual. And that would alleviate the issue that we're seeing here with that first question, where everybody's being recorded on a single entry or a single document that the next person coming in can see the previous entries. It would be a dedicated record for each one. So what I'm getting at here is the idea is, a lot of companies have gone to self-check at home, and you're asked upon arrival, did you do your temperature screening, and are you feeling fine? Move on, and that's about where we leave it at this point in time. So yes, it may be a medical record if a licensed healthcare practitioner is the one that's going to be recording those entries for you as the employer. So I'd be an advocate to try to stay away from that if possible.
Thanks, Scott. The next question, this is a real quick one, so I'll hit this one. It is that the person received information about being able to provide fitness for duty, also called return to work evaluations, for those who tested positive for COVID, and to determine if it's safe to return to work, and what does that entail. So just clarification is the CDC guidelines and everything that's published out there, when you are over COVID or recovered from COVID, there's some pretty good standards out there. They've been evolving as we've learned more. A lot of it is, though, self-report, or it's coming from their personal physician, which you can usually get some sort of note to pass on to your employer. Some companies, and that can be good enough. Some companies will maybe want to be looking out more for and have their own opinion on that one, rather than just take the word of the employee and or their doctor. And that's where fit for duty or return to work comes in, and what that evaluation involves. And sometimes it can be done by over the phone, but sometimes it is something that the person should come in person. It is taking a doctor, an occupational medicine physician or provider, and they're going through a lot of just a lot of steps to really drill down and make sure. Dr. Pelosi last week, who's seen dozens of people wanting to return to work at Lehigh Valley Health Network, mentioned that he's run into some things where someone, he said, "Are you seeing symptoms?" And he goes through the symptoms. They're no. Your shortness of breath, no. But he has them walk down the hall and come back, and they're out of breath. You're out of breath. It's a yes/no question that someone could perhaps fudge. The other one was, do you have a persistent cough? No, I don't. Okay, take 5 deep breaths, and be somewhere in the middle of the 5 deep breaths, they start coughing. Okay, you're not ready to come back. Those are the type, I'm not a doctor, but those are the type of things that we really drill down on, as well as the CDC guidelines, to try and call it catch people that are anxious to get back, but might not be quite ready yet. Okay. Did you want to say something there, Carolyn?
Yeah, I was noticing that there was a question about whether or not the mental health system can, handle the influx of mental health concerns as folks return to work. And I think that is an excellent question, and that is something that we are all going to have to be monitoring very closely, because we are predicting a huge surge in mental health conditions like depression, PTSD, is really a major concern, because for many folks, this is, as you described your friend's employee, it's very traumatic, and that trauma sometimes takes us by surprise, and the loss coming back to work, having to do things so differently, it can create sort of a traumatic experience for folks. And so I think what is so important for employers to be thinking about is how well connected are you with, mental health resources, whether you have an EAP or not, making sure that you have somebody that really understands what's available to your folks. And again, it's, we got to make it okay for people to reach out. That's still a problem, overcoming that stigma. Because everyone is afraid, and if they're trying to come back to work, just like what you described, people want to come back to work. They're not going to talk about if they're struggling with a mental health condition, because they want to come back to work. And so it is important for us to make it okay. And the best way to do that is for leaders to talk about their own experience, to share, and to bring their EAP programs into the fold somehow, put it right in front of employees so that they feel comfortable connecting with resources. So.
Thank you. I have, the one here that's on the chat to everyone, and this is a tricky one, but I'd like you to weigh in on this one first, Carolyn. If an employee has a note from a medical professional that they are too anxious, scared to come back to work, even though the workplace has appropriate safety measures, can we legally terminate employment for lack of performance? Or is mental health a protected reason not to terminate?
Well, I mean, mental health is, if they have a diagnosis, if they're working with a physician and they have a diagnosis of a mental health condition, that is preventing them from returning to work, they might be on, take family medical leave. And I mean, you as an employer are obligated to honor that. I think, the goal is always to, if there is a diagnosis, to come up with reasonable accommodations, just like you would with any other physical disability. So I mean, in terms of legal termination, I think that you'd have to be cautious about that. I mean, we need some legal advice on that question. But I do know that we, as an EAP program, have put people out of work with a diagnosable mental health condition until they're able to get appropriate treatment. It's not an indefinite, it's not out of work forever, it's out of work while they're addressing their mental health condition. And the goal is always to try to get them to a place where they are able to go back to work. But it's challenging. I know it's really it's challenging right now, because pretty much, everybody wants to be out of work if they're afraid right now. So that's why it's so important to engage those mental health professionals who can do an appropriate assessment and diagnosis and treatment plan.
Yeah, I would definitely engage in the interactive process with that employee, and
yes,
and I hate to just dish it, but definitely consult with your legal counsel before taking any steps, because there is, even ADA can come into place in situations like this. So
if it's a diagnosable mental health condition, it's the same as having a physical condition, no different. Yeah.
Okay, this one is, I think this one would be good for you to start with, Tiffany. The question was, it is said before about health coaching as support for employees struggling through this time. Can you elaborate a little bit on how health coaching is helping people or can help people through this, as opposed to the counseling as Carolyn talks about?
Yeah, absolutely. So with health coaching, you're connected directly with one of our health coaches, or if you choose to go with another service or provider. So health coaching, you connect with a person individually. You're not connected just through email. You're actually having a conversation with someone. And that's missing from a lot of people's lives right now, just because a lot of us are working remotely, haven't seen our actual coworkers in person in months. So health coaching kind of connects with a person, meets them where they are, can talk through the stresses that they're going through, some of the thoughts running through their mind, and a health coach will help to kind of guide the employee to look at their goals, see what they need help with if it's managing stress or eating healthier. And then so a health coach can work with them with phone calls. It can just be one long phone call, or it can be over the course of a couple weeks. And that health coach can talk through things with them. And then also, I mentioned in the presentation where if someone is struggling with mental health, a health coach will refer them over to EAP services. And then also if someone is maybe having extreme stomach pain or something and they think it's just what they're eating, but then the health coach is not able to address that concern, they can also refer them to like a primary care physician or something. If it's like a medical issue, a health coach, that would be outside the scope of a health coach's role, but they would be able to refer them to a primary care physician. So it just kind of meets the employee where they are to discuss different things with them.
I'd like to just make a comment about that, because I think that health coaching is often less threatening for folks. And so it's often a great way to do that baseline assessment of, how somebody's doing. And we struggle in the mental health field with having folks feel comfortable reaching out to us. I think health coaching is such a great resource because people are more likely on some occasions to reach out to a health coach. And then the health coach having that experience of, knowing when it's time to refer them on to somebody else. I think it's just a great continuum of care, that it just broadens the reach, and helps us reach more people at different points on the continuum.
Okay, thank you. I think, just quick scrolling through here, but I think that is the extent of the questions that I have here. Yeah, we got that one. We got that one. So do you have, that's it for the questions I have. Did Carolyn or Tiffany, do you have anything you wanted to end in? Because then we usually end with giving Scott Shamandel, OSHA, a few minutes to throw anything out there for the good of the group. But do you two have any parting words of wisdom you want to say before we move on?
The only thing that I have to say is that I just want to emphasize how challenging this is for everybody. And, everyone on the call, I'm sure is acting as a leader in some way. And so I want to emphasize that your own self-care is so, so important. That you need to take care of yourself so that you can take care of others. And I know it's tempting as folks are coming back to work to feel, really cautious about them, and you want to take care of them and you want to nurture them, but don't forget to nurture yourselves as well. That is so, so important. And reach out to your resources, consult with your EAP programs, consult with HealthWorks, consult, because again, we're establishing all this new status quo. So we need to have those rituals that we engage in that bring everything to a conscious level for us. So make sure you know your resources and connect with them.
Yeah, and I just have some parting words that wellness is not an immediate thing. We talk all the time about how it's a gradual process. So you don't have to right away overhaul everything you're doing just to eat healthier. Incorporate healthier things into your life, even in the workplace. Incorporate different healthier things into the workplace. And it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight, just like the whole coming back to work is not going to happen overnight. So keep it in mind, keep it in the forefront of your mind, and we'll all get through it together.
Thank you so much to both of you. Scott, do you have some updates you want to give the group?
Well, first, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you both. Fabulous information. Definitely things to take away that I'll probably try to implement when we get back to our office. The only thing, Scott, I thought I would want to maybe just share for you as an effort to get out to everybody. This morning, I recently received a series of back to work safely documents from the American Industrial Hygiene Association, from everything from construction activities to at-home services to gyms to general offices to restaurants and retail shops, that I think would be a really useful guide for your stakeholders here to get a hold of. And if you could forward that on to everybody, that would be fabulous. Even though some of the guidances are specific to an industry, I think in premise and in general concept, there are some fabulous ideas to take a look at for whatever your industry is. So other than that, please continue to take a look at our website, because we are constantly, it seems almost daily, putting some new information on our website. So other than that, Scott, thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. You know how to reach us if you have any, if you think of any other questions. You know, you can send them directly to Carolyn or Tiffany. Send it to me, and I'll triage it where it needs to go. But other than that, enjoy your Tuesday and have a great week. Thanks, everybody.